A 16-year-old girl stands in front of her mirror, turning a chain around her neck, a class ring hanging off it, way too big for her finger, cold against her collarbone. She doesn't mind. The whole school could look at that ring and know exactly what it meant. She was going steady. Nobody had to explain it. A small piece of metal already said everything. Dating in America back then came with its own rule book, never written down anywhere, but every kid grew up knowing it by heart, down to the smallest detail. Break one of these rules, and the whole school would know by lunch. And by the time we get to the very last rule, you'll understand why breaking up back then could feel almost as public as a wedding. Rule 8. The boy paid. That was the rule. The boy paid, full stop. No splitting the check, no reaching for her wallet, not even the polite gesture of offering. If he was the one who asked her out, the bill was his responsibility from the moment they walked in the door. For some boys, that meant real budgeting, skipping lunch for a week, mowing an extra lawn on Saturday, just to cover a movie ticket and 2 milkshakes after. Nobody made a big deal out of it. It was just what you did if you wanted to take a girl out, and most boys figured out how to make it work one way or another. There was a kind of quiet pride in it too. Paying for the date wasn't a burden so much as proof you could handle one. A small, early rehearsal for being the kind of man who could provide, long before anyone used a word like that. Rule 7. Honking the horn. Turn the car right back around. A boy honking from the driveway was about as rude as showing up late. He was expected to park, walk up the path, ring the bell, and step into a living room that suddenly felt smaller than it had 5 minutes earlier. Her mother would offer a glass of lemonade, maybe a plate of cookies nobody actually wanted to eat. Her father would settle into his chair with the kind of calm that made teenage boys sweat, and ask the question every boy in America seemed to get asked at some point. So, where are you taking my daughter tonight, and what time will she be home? It sounds like a lot to put a 17-year-old through just to see a movie. But for plenty of people, that living room is the part of the memory that stuck the hardest. Heart pounding louder sitting on that couch than it ever did holding hands in the dark of a theatre. Rule 6. Going steady came with proof you could wear. A class ring, a fraternity pin, a letterman jacket so big on her it practically swallowed her whole, sleeves rolled up 3 times just so her hands could poke out. When a couple went steady, they traded something you could actually see, and she wore it everywhere on purpose, so nobody had to ask. That's where the phrase "getting pinned" came from. A tiny piece of metal carrying almost the weight of a proposal. Kids traded these tokens the way people trade rings today, except everyone in the hallway understood the message instantly. Looking back, it's a little funny how much meaning got packed into something you could lose in a couch cushion. But for a teenager in 1963, that jacket draped over her shoulders said more than any conversation could. Rule 5. Her parents had a say too. Going steady was never just between 2 teenagers. A few dates in and you'd already met both families, sat across the dinner table, answered questions, been quietly sized up. Parents kept an eye on things, asked around about a new boyfriend's reputation, sometimes talked it over behind closed doors after the kids went to bed. Going steady did not always mean marriage, but everyone understood it was more serious than just going out for fun. And that's exactly why the next rule mattered so much. Dating wasn't treated like some casual pastime, it was pointed somewhere. If you just remembered where your own class ring ended up, hit that like button. The next part is where it gets interesting. Rule 4. Dating had marriage in mind, and usually sooner rather than later. This wasn't "let's see where it goes." Young couples dated with an endpoint already in view. By the late 1950s, marrying young was common enough that nobody treated it as unusual. The average American bride back then was barely into her 20s, sometimes younger still. It sounds rushed by today's standards, where couples date for years before even discussing the idea. Back then, it was the opposite instinct that raised eyebrows. A couple going steady for too long without any talk of a ring started to make people wonder what they were waiting for. Rule 3. Then a small pill and a book started loosening the old script. In 1960, the FDA approved the birth control pill. 2 years later, in 1962, a writer named Helen Gurley Brown published Sex and the Single Girl, putting into words an idea that felt genuinely bold at the time. A relationship could matter on its own, without needing a wedding to justify it. There was no single headline moment, no dramatic turning point you could point to on a calendar. It happened quietly, book by book, conversation by conversation. The way people thought about love slowly starting to loosen at the edges. Rule 2. A breakup was news by the next morning. The ring went back. The jacket went back, usually folded and handed over in the school parking lot with as much dignity as either of them could manage. And word travelled faster than the bell between classes. By second period, half the school already knew, and had an opinion about whose fault it was. There was no quietly fading out of someone's life the way people do now. Breaking up was a public event, discussed at lockers, debated at lunch tables, sometimes forcing mutual friends to awkwardly pick a side. For a lot of teenagers, the hardest part wasn't just losing the person, it was watching the whole story end in front of an audience. Rule 1. Nobody had to sit on the couch anymore. By the late 1970s, in more and more places, a boy might pull up to pick up his date, give one quick honk, and that's it. No living room, no lemonade, no father waiting with a list of questions. Her parents, if they glanced out the kitchen window, might just exchange a look and say, "Well, I guess that's how they do it now." Looking back, those 7 rules weren't as rigid as they sound to us now. If anything, there was something almost comforting about them. Everyone knew where they stood. There were fewer guessing games, at least on the surface. Honking the horn got you in real trouble, sure. But the rules were clear. You learned them early. Every family's couch had a boy on it at some point, waiting nervously to be approved. And then, one day, nobody sat there anymore. The father who once asked all those pointed questions eventually became a grandfather, watching his own grandkids date through a phone screen, shaking his head and smiling anyway. Strange now. Normal then. They weren't doing anything wrong by following those rules. They were just living by the rhythm of their time. Some of those dates became long marriages, some became old photographs tucked in a drawer, and some became stories people still smile about decades later, over coffee with someone who remembers too. If you ever wore a class ring or sat through your own version of that living room interview, tell us about it in the comments. Somebody reading this might recognize their own story in yours.